moving on to the next slide, which is the reason why we're on this call. I'm sure we can either all identify with this one or two of these situations. We've been through them. You can even put a face to the people, or you're one of those people. Uh, the reason why we're on this call is to find out what we can do or how we can get out of this toxic situation. The last time somebody asked me about whether they should quit, which is what I did. As I said, at the time I was very immature. Uh, if I could go back, there are certain things that I've done differently, and this is what I want to talk to you about. The first thing I'll talk about on how to deal with this situation is recognizing that you're in a toxic environment. First of all, being aware that this is now getting toxic, appreciating and acknowledging it. This is something I never did. When I was working in that organization at that time, I just went with the flow. And what then happened is I also became part of the toxic. I started exhibiting the toxic behavior because I went with the flow and moved on with what was happening at that time. That and my and it was not being pointed at the time, but there are people who were more mature and were able to call it out, and they called it out and said, this is not right. What is happening here is not right. But for me, first of all, it was my first work opportunity, so I didn't know any better. And because that is what I met and that is what was going on, I assumed that was what should happen in any work situation. So the thing about recognizing whether a situation is toxic or not is that it will help you know how to deal with it. So if you know the causes, the effects, the things that I was talking about, if you know how to recognize a toxic situation, then you will know how to deal with it, which is what I'm going to break down as we go ahead. Then you need to reflect, which just means pause, step back, look at yourself, look at whether you could be part of the reason why the toxic behavior is being exhibited, or whether you are exhibiting yourself, or even get a different frame of reference. My friend and colleague keeps talking about perception. You may think you know it or you are right, but perception really matters. So look at it from a different angle and examine, which would then explain part of the things that I was talking about, where I told you that one-offs don't make a situation toxic or don't make a line manager toxic. So having a different perception, a different reference point also helps in understanding and seeing it from a different way could actually make you know, or you would be able to you'd be able to know that the situation is not toxic or that it is indeed toxic. Another thing that comes out of reflecting and pausing and thinking is that you start to understand people's thinking patterns. Observing people makes you understand why they are toxic, what is causing them to be toxic, and also helps you to think about what your next course of action will be. Yeah, so the first thing is to reflect, pause, stand back, and look outside in, as opposed to being in the middle of the mess and looking at the situation as it is. Again, I'll go to the landmine situation. If you're in the landmine, you don't go into the landmine and then start looking for the landmines. You first have to come out, recognize that there is danger, and then approach that area, knowing what you're getting yourself into. The third thing is KYB. I keep saying this all the time. I tell people this, the same way you have KYC, know your customer, there's KYB, know your boss. So I've talked about the causes and the things that make people toxic. So know the triggers for your line leader, or know the triggers for the person who is toxic to you, and recognize that people are human and people have been through things that they wouldn't want to be through, and they're still going through them. And then avoid being the trigger for those situations, or avoid being a trigger in those situations. So in situations where your line manager does not like to be surprised, your line manager doesn't like to be thrown under the bus, they like to be informed of everything, be the person who then you know what your line manager doesn't like, and then manage it from backwards to just avoid the trigger. Remember that line leaders are human just like you. They get upset, they get itched, and you can avoid these things. Where you can avoid these things, it is advisable that you do. The fourth thing is creating boundaries and knowing what the boundaries are and not crossing those boundaries. So this may contradict what I told you earlier about it being about myself being relational. I'm very relational, but there are some things that I don't bring to the workplace. Because what happens is that you cross some lines, and once you cross those lines you cannot go back because you have this familiarity, and you know what familiarity does. You know that famous saying, familiarity breeds contempt. So when you go to the office, and especially if you're discussing upwards or downwards, and you're talking about, for example, issues you're having in your with your spouse to either your boss or somebody that reports to you, it's very easy for that person to take sides and then build contempt, and they start looking at you. They stop looking at you from a professional angle, and you start having what you call I'll say it in Swahili, kuzoeana, where you now no longer have respect for the person, and it's more of relational. So even the professional boundaries are crossed and cut, and it just becomes drama. And that's how toxic behavior starts coming about, because the next thing you're talking about this person behind their back, the next thing they're telling you something, and you're thinking, no wonder you couldn't even stay with your spouse, or no wonder your mother is always saying you're lazy, and it's just boundaries that are crossed that shouldn't have been crossed. So know the boundaries to keep. Be relational. Being relational doesn't mean that you have to go and tell everyone everything that is happening in your life, especially when you know your perception is going to be compromised. The perception, your professional perception is going to be compromised. Okay. So the next thing that you should avoid doing is joining that whole dance and the drama, which is one of the things that I didn't do. And I'll give an example here. My land manager at the time was what they did is, I wouldn't say passive, but there are things that, like I mentioned earlier, they were in my it was my responsibility to do, but then they wouldn't give it to me, and what they would then do is give it to the person who was sort of reporting to me, someone who was junior to me. And I remember one of them was a recruitment that was taking place in another country, and the person I was giving, the person who was junior to me, some responsibilities to do in our work area, and they told me, oh, but tomorrow I'm not going to be there because I'm doing this and this. And the first thing I thought was like, what? You're going to do what? I don't even know, it's not even in my radar. And that's something that was in my JD. So what I did then is I took out I became toxic towards that junior person, because obviously I'm not going to become toxic towards my line manager. And then I started seeing that my line manager would do this over and over and over again. So I joined the drama. In short, I also became toxic, and the situation became toxic. I was toxic. My line manager was toxic. The person who was junior to me was complaining that the whole situation is toxic, and it's like wool that is interwoven, and you can't even know who is not, who is good, and who is bad, because even the person who was junior to me started becoming toxic to me, talking behind my back, telling people about me, about our situation. And there was a lot of gossip, which is also an indication of what toxic looks like. Yeah, so avoid the drama, stay out of it. There was a famous, I remember one of our former presidents who was very quiet, and I remember one of the political analysts saying, silence annoys even the devil. I have never forgotten that, because there is nothing truer than that. Like, where is the lie in that statement? Sometimes it just requires for you to step out, keep quiet, or manage your affairs without getting involved in the drama. The other thing is keep a record of or document what is happening to you. And the intention here is not for you to be malicious. The intention here is not for you to create a situation of where trust is not there, or for you to now build a case against someone. This is especially important in a situation where the line manager is abusive or it's against company policy. So I'm talking here about harassment, bullying, even sexual harassment. Keep a record of texts, emails. You need to be able to have a conversation where you can say, you can walk in and say, here is what was said. This is who was there when this was being said, and you're able to bring evidence to the table to actually show that this person is toxic, or they are harassing you or abusing you as you're reporting. Which leads me to the next point, which is just escalating. You can escalate either to, depending on the reporting channels available in your organizations, to your HR personnel in the organization. You can escalate to the line leader. So the leader of your leader, I call them skip levels. So escalate it, but before you escalate it, there's something that I want to recommend that you do, which is have an open and honest conversation about what is going on. And don't go into that conversation by being combative. Don't go by being defensive. And how you do this is by going and accusing them and telling them, you are doing this to me, this is what I'm feeling. Obviously, the reaction that you will get is now defensive and combative. And that is something that you don't want to be getting into. So you do this. Open and honest conversations are had by asking questions. It's by stating an observation. For example, I have noticed that you are not very happy, or you are not impressed when I do this and this. What is it that I'm not doing right that I could do better to change how I'm doing things? So that's how you can manage that conversation. And asking more questions, listening more, helps to have a calm conversation, because what you're doing is you're reflecting, and you're also causing your line manager to reflect. So I'd advise that you have this conversation before you escalate. What this also does is that it enables you to be the leader that you wish your line leader was. Remember, one of the causes I said of a toxic, where a person would be a toxic line manager, is because they do not have leadership capabilities. This gives you an opportunity then to be the leader that you wish your line manager was. Yeah. And to be honest with you, there's very little people who have the maturity that they should have at the point in which they're operating in as a leader. And me saying that you be the leader that your line leader should be, most of the times leadership doesn't come with a title, it doesn't come with pay, it comes with an attitude and a behavior. And then it's being a leader is not necessarily, what I'm saying is, being a leader is not necessarily the people who have been handed over the leadership responsibilities. Okay, so sorry, I was interrupted there for a minute. Sorry. So the next point I will make, which is the 8th point, if you've been counting, is the recognition that the boss or you will leave. The good thing about organization, and somebody said this to me when I was going through the situation that I was in, even your line, even the best managing director, the best CEO, has not been buried in the compound of the organization that you work for. A time will come when everyone will leave. And I think in the other talk, I gave you an example of a director who quit their job because their line leader was bad. Can you imagine if a director is quitting, how much worse it is at the bottom? And what happened is they hadn't even served their notice when the leader was then terminated on grounds of harassment and lack of respect for their employees. So one of you will leave. The thing is, don't leave when you're not ready. By the time you're leaving, leave when by your own terms. when you live as though you're not being chased out, you're living because it is your time to live, and you acknowledge that it is your time to live. And it goes back to the conversation we had last time. And if you haven't watched that, the video is available on YouTube. You should actually go and watch it, because it tells you when you should leave when you should leave employment, and how to prepare for you to leave employment. You don't leave because you are being chased out. Yeah, I remember that situation. There's a time I wanted to quit, and then I thought to myself and said, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to let this line manager work hard to kick me out of here. If I'm working hard to stay with them, then let them work hard to kick me out. They didn't do it, but eventually I left because I had another opportunity. If I left at that time, I was going to leave to nothing. Yeah, and you remember what I said. Living a job for nothing is not something you do in Africa. There is so much at stake. So live by your own terms and when you are ready. Or you never know, line managers leave as well. The ninth point is taking the high road. So just do the right thing, stick to your guns, regardless of what the situation is, and do your job. Because a bad performance coming out of a toxic situation is not something that you can then say that happened to you. You can't say you're performing badly because you had a bad situation. Okay. Uh, then finally, I'm going to talk about the last resort. That is, if you leave, do your research on the organization that you're going to work for. Leave when you are ready. I had a situation where I got an opportunity with another organization, and I did my research. What I did is I'll just tell you a tip of how to do research on an organization. I went to LinkedIn. I typed the name of the organization. This is a lot of work. It's being extra, which is what I do because I've gone through it, and now, like I said, I'm more mature. I went through LinkedIn. I looked through the people who work in that organization, and I looked for the HR person who was in that organization and who I was going to replace. I sent them a message on LinkedIn and asked them if I could talk to them because I want to get some information. Luckily, this person was cooperative and they gave me their number. I talked to them and they were able to shed light on the culture in this organization. What that avoided for me, I obviously rejected that opportunity. But what that did for me is that it avoided a situation where I was leaving one. There goes my one of my coworkers. Let me just manage this. Give me a minute. Thanks. Part of the joys of being at home and doing these things from the house. So what that avoided me is me leaving one us line manager for another us line manager in a different organization, because it's very possible for you to leave one toxic line manager and go and work for another toxic line manager. The only difference is the organization. So I was able to I declined the opportunity, and I told them that I'd done my research and I wasn't comfortable to work in that organization. This applies whether you have a toxic line manager or not. Whenever you get a job, do your research on the line manager, on the organization you're going to work for. One of the other big cues I'll tell you when you're going for a job is for the interview stage. Whenever I go for an interview and the person interviewing me goes straight to the job details, they are not open about who they are. So I told you I'm a very relational person. Somebody who's not looking to build a relationship with me, that's already a red flag. And I was telling Michael, I was talking to someone the other day, and it was a professional conversation we were having, and the person told me they have a cat. Yeah, that already tells you this person is very relational. And they told me about the experiences and what, it was very authentic. So I could obviously tell that I'm going to be able to connect with this person. But where you go for an interview, or you're looking to join an organization, do your research, ask the right questions in the interview room, understand the people you're working with, so that when you're making a decision, you're making a decision based on facts, and it's an institution or organization you'd really want to work for. Yep. So those are the 10 points I have gone through. I'm now open to taking any questions. Please type them in and share anything as well that you'd like to share as well.
Thanks, Anneliese. I can see many people saying this was very informative. So thank you very much for that. I think I'll ask the first question that I saw that did come a while back. So the question was, how do you handle favoritism in the workplace? So as an example, there are certain situations where the manager tends to value you less than they do other people. So how do you handle that form of favoritism?
Yeah, we go through this a lot. I think it happens every day, and it's not anything bad that the line manager is doing. It's something that is human nature. Even parents, I know parents say that they don't have a favorite child, but deep down, if they were put in a corner, there's one that they would save over the other. Yeah, we all love them differently, but there's always a favorite, and it happens in the workplace. I'll share my experience, what I did wrong, and then what I did right. So, and one of them is lesson 1 on politics. But let me tell you what I did wrong. What I did wrong in that organization that I left is I shared with somebody who was my friend that I think my line manager is playing favorites within the team. What that friend did is then they carried this information to my line manager, and then the drama escalated. Yeah, because then my line manager was calling me and confronting me about the situation, and there's nothing as bad as being confronted by or confronted of a situation that you thought was private to you and the person you are telling, and it's something that you are not ready for. I don't like walking into situations that I'm not ready or I'm not prepared. So that was a bad thing I did, is that I joined the drama and joined the gossip mill. The right thing that I did in another situation is the boss had a favorite. What I did is I aligned, this is politics, I aligned to the favorite, because if my head, I thought if Anneliese is your favorite, then if I'm friends or if I'm very close to Anneliese, I will join the favorite group. And it actually worked, because then the person would be given responsibilities, and it wasn't personal. I didn't go and start visiting them in their house. It's just that I went and told this person who was a favorite, I'm looking to build skills in this and this area. Whenever you have opportunities, please invite me to work with you. And I started doing that. And then, because the things that they were, if you're a favorite to your boss, you tend to get the good projects or the projects of high value. So I started working with this other person, and eventually the line manager started seeing the one who was playing favorites, that hey, this person is also just as capable as this other person. So it got to a point where when this favorite was not there, I was a de facto person. The other thing that happened is, i- we got to a place where the line manager was able to see that I actually had the capabilities that the favorite had. So it's also an opportunity. It's politics, but it works. And it's not any politics that will harm anyone. It's just knowing how to align yourself. Don't struggle to go and align with or don't struggle with the person who's playing favorites. Struggle with the favorite and get them to get you into the good books of the other leader. That was what I did.
That's a brilliant way to handle it. I think the next question is pretty much linked to this one. I want to skip a few to one that has just come in a few seconds ago. They were asking, what if in a situation where the HR office or where you'd think to report, that particular office is toxic as well? So they're being unprofessional, they're being very political. So what do you do in such a situation?
I I hope I'm not that person, first and foremost. I hope I'm not that HR person. But so Michael, what you're asking is where the HR person is also being unprofessional.
Yes, so the HR person that let's say you have that boss of yours who's very unprofessional or toxic in that sense, and then you did talk about escalation as a key way which you can handle it. So But then the place that you would go for solace, which would be like a HR office, or maybe if there's a complaints, HR complaints office, the people in that office, they're also very unprofessional. They're also very political. So how do you handle that situation?
So the thing to do is obviously, if you have, remember I told you to document evidence, to document things that are going on that you can bring to the table to prove what you're saying is actually true. The other thing you could do in this situation, which is part of, I'm teaching you politics as well in this club. The other thing that you could do is, and I have done it, I'll share my experience. It necessarily doesn't have to work, is quit your line manager. Yeah, I've quit my line manager. I haven't quit the organization. That was earlier on in my career when I quit the line manager. And what I did is I stopped paying attention to the nasty situations that they were bringing into my life, and I focused more on their line manager. So I started to work to impress their line manager, so that I'm building trust. By the time I'm going to tell their line manager that this is a situation I'm going through, the trust is already there. So I focused on my job. I did my job like to the best of my ability, so that it attracts the attention that you want it to attract. People are able to trust you because your job is already speaking for itself, so that by the time you're addressing it with their line manager, then it's a walkover. I knew I couldn't go to my HR partner at the time because they were one and the same thing. So in any situation, there's always someone who you can go to, uh, and where escalation then is not the thing that you're looking for, become indispensable. And you become indispensable by working hard, by knowing all the things. I know there are people in your organizations who you know, no matter what they do or no matter what happens, the organization is going to be fighting to keep them. So know the thing that will make you indispensable, or the thing that will make you gain trust from people, such that when you speak, it's not, there's nothing that is being questioned. Your work already speaks for itself, and it has built you trust enough for you to be able to bring any complaints to the table.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
There's a question I saw here, maybe I can address.
Yes, go ahead.
Someone was asking, are there situations where an employee is toxic but blames their line manager? Every day. I see this every day. The thing with toxic people is that they also like to blame people. One of the toxic line managers I worked with before was used to hang up their phones on people as you talk to them, or when you're in a conversation, they just bang the phone on you. And when this person resigned and the whole case was raised and the whole discussion was going on about that situation, the line leader said, but this is how I am. Yeah, you pass on the blame to something else or a situation. And I remember at that time, I asked the leader who said that, I also have a personality and I also get upset. Would that also be tolerable if it was me? So the situation, when you, I'm assuming that here you're the line leader, then it asks, what is being asked of you is to be the leader, to actually take the leadership position and lead this person, which means having the open and honest conversation. Remember the conversation I was talking about, where you're asking questions and you're driving honest, open conversations as opposed to blaming. So the thing with toxic people and toxic situations is that they are very defensive. They are they're very combative. So the one thing you don't want to go is approach them with the things that you already see are going on wrong. It's better to approach the situation where you're asking questions more and listening, and hopefully by that they will see the sense of what you're saying. So very many situations where the employee is toxic. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I see one more question that was asked. And what if the toxic relationship is causing you negative concerns? Is that a situation where you should quit? I think we had already addressed that, but you can just highlight it again.
So I can't guarantee that all the things I've told you will work perfectly. There's times when it doesn't work as you Even medicine sometimes doesn't work. That's why people unfortunately die. But what you can do is try at the things I've told you. But when it gets to the point where it's affecting your own personal, well-being, you're getting sick, the only then it's better for you to leave. There's no job that is worth dying for. Yeah. But I'd advise that you take the tips that I've shared with you earlier and work at keeping your job and leaving when you want to leave, not leaving because the situation requires for you to leave.
Cool. One more question is, I think there's two of the same, so we could address them at the same time. So one is asking, how do you remain relational without giving information that could be used against you? And I think another one is linked to the same is, sometimes being relational can be used against you. So they're talking about giving an example of how they left a toxic environment that was really productive than their current environment. However, they still left it because they preferred to work in a less toxic environment. So how do you still remain relational but don't give information that could be used against you?
So it's a challenge that I've had, and being relational is knowing what to keep out, especially things that you know are going to cause you to become to cause familiarity. So when I talk about being relational, is finding out how the person is doing, having a conversation with that person about who they are, knowing who they are, or sharing about who you are, what is happening, what happened to you over the weekend. uh, it doesn't You don't have to go into the drama of what really happened. It could be hanging out with your boss and telling your boss, this weekend I went to see my family, we had nyama choma. Yeah, my dad is fine. I have two sons. One of my son likes, like for example, today I've shared with my boss the way my son is doing exams and I'm invigilating exams. So that is not necessarily, it's not going to, I'm not giving information that would jeopardize my reputation, would make them question me as an individual, but it's information that makes me a human being. Yeah. So being relational is just having conversations that humanize you. Talk about songs that you like, and we are human. Yeah. So it's just being able to bring that out as opposed to bring the negative aspects of humanity. Don't tell them about the fight you had with your spouse, the fight you had with your mother. eh, you know Only share conversations, general sort of small talk, you would say. Think about going for a wedding or for a party and the conversations you'd have with people on meeting them at first glance.
Perfect. There is also two questions that are actually very close to each other as well. So,
Sorry, Michael, I didn't answer the other question you asked about where you leave an organization and something. There
so
were
it,
two questions you
it was just a bit of a background
or
to.
context. Okay, okay, okay.
Yes. So the
Clear.
other one is about leading peers. So I think there's a comment allowed around leading peers, which is also linked to a question here where somebody asked, what if, how do you tell a colleague that they're toxic to the employees that are reporting to them? So I'm assuming this is a manager who's managing people, and they also have a colleague who's a manager managing people, and they can see how the other manager is managing people. It's not right, and they want to help, but it's a bit of a tough situation. How do you handle that?
When I did a short course in psychology. When I did psychology, one of the things that we were told on managing tough conversations or starting out tough conversations is starting them with questions, which I've said before, and starting with questions that begin with what, not why. Don't start conversations with why are you like this, Michael. That was already accusing them of being a certain type of way. So asking questions, for example, I'm assuming it's your peer, is what is causing the poor performance in your team, what is causing all the noise, that sort of thing. The other thing is to use evidence. So I'm assuming your organization has climate surveys where you do You check with people how they are faring in the organization, and hopefully part of the questions that the employees are asked has to do with line management. So the thing about this is that you're already going there with facts, or where if you have a survey of some sort where this has been called out, or people have come to you in confidence and have told you, this is how Anneliese is and this is how Anneliese is behaving as my line leader. Yeah, so you can pick up the conversation from there, but how you approach it, remember to use more questions, remember to use less accusatory terms. So start the conversations like, what is happening? You have to, again, like I told you, and one of the things that I'm passionate about is relational. So don't go to this person first of all if you don't have a relationship with them. Don't use this situation to build a relationship with them. So if you are already relational with this person, you will be able to pick it up from somewhere. And they will already have the trust that they need to have for you to have this conversation with them. So open, honest conversation, and then again use facts if you have them.
Thank you. I think a good question here that also has a bit of context. So somebody is saying they feel most of the times they've been offended at work, especially when they're in a toxic relationship, and they feel like there's a value in them that is being violated. So how do you think that organizations can get to understand employees better in terms of understanding who the employees really are?
Sorry, I'm just reading that as well. So I feel like most of them. So the first thing is to step back. What is it that is offending you? Is it words that are being spoken towards you? Is it that you are getting bypassed for promotions or for increments? What is it that is offending you? Then, how do organizations understand employees better? So, again, it's the building the relationships that I was talking about. First of all, and this just tells you the importance of building relations. When somebody knows you and who you are, and I know you know me, I have two sons, I'm like this, I'm like this, it becomes very hard for you to offend me, because I'm no longer an employee. I'm an individual and I'm a person with a name that you know and you respect, and you know what I stand for and what is behind me. So I cannot stress enough when I tell you I'm passionate about being relational and relationship building, is because it removes a whole load of other things that are assumed when that is not done. So when my line manager knows certain things about me, what I did over the weekend, how I really enjoyed going for swimming with my sons, the next time she wants to say something too bad at me, and that is how influencers are making us buy things. By the way, they make us feel like they know you or you know them. It's sort of like, it's how Kim Kardashian became Kim Kardashian, and the Kardashian family became the Kardashian family. They let us know, they let us into their lives, and then you start feeling as if they're your friends. They really aren't, but then you start trusting them and they recommend a product and you buy it. Same thing applies to you. If you want if you want people to know you, then work at people knowing you and building those relationships. Yeah, it's part of what you need to do in life to gain the respect, and even to get people to start to trust and respect you. I don't know if that answers the question, Michael.
I think brilliantly it does. So one more question. First of all, I'll read out something that somebody said, and it was also a video that I watched yesterday. So they were saying that Simon Sinek said many times that employees are often trained how to do their jobs, but they're not
Yes.
really trained how to lead. So I think
Yes.
that's also a big reason, and you did highlight why people do end up being toxic managers. It's because they really don't know how to lead, but they know how to do their jobs. So I think the next,
They move from managing self to managing others without the capability of managing others being developed.
exactly, yes. So I think
Agreed.
one question here is, how do you deal with a line manager who clearly lacks emotional intelligence, especially in critical situations?
First, very good for acknowledging or being aware that this person lacks emotional intelligence. So it's something that you already expect. You expect that when things go bad, they're going to shout or scream or, whatever they're going to do. So the first step is knowing that you are in the right direction. The second thing is being the leader in that situation. And being the leader in that situation is, think about when you're, and I'm going to give the example of a child here. It's a very bad example to give, but it's what I think I can relate to. When my son is throwing tantrums, or when I see my son is crying, and even though they are valid in their crying, one of the things I tell my son when they cry is, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel bad, but that will not change the situation that you're in. So first of all, it's acknowledging that your line manager is feeling the way they are, and you can't change how people are. Letting them go through the emotion of feeling the way they are, and that may mean that you have to walk away from that situation. I've been in a situation where my line manager, actually, the environment was very toxic. And one time I came into our office was open plan, and my line manager was crying, and it was because of a situation at work. And I was reporting to this line leader. So the first thing I did is walk away. I remember I was walking towards where we were sitting. I literally walked back. I didn't even turn. I kind of reversed like a car. And I walked back. First of all, it was embarrassing for me to be in that situation. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to tell her. And then number two, I knew it was okay, and that is, it's okay to cry, but I didn't feel like I needed to cause or to be there when she's going through this embarrassing moment for her. What I would have done is I should have taken her out of that situation. If I was a leader at that point, or if I had the maturity I had at that point, was to have taken her out of that situation and then have a conversation where I'm telling her that this is not, what is it that I can do, moving past that situation, or having a conversation of moving past that situation. So that's what I'd have done differently. So it's okay for people to cry. It's okay for people to have emotions, but be the leader and remove them from a situation where they're embarrassing themselves, and have a conversation of what next.
Thanks for that. I think we have a very brilliant question here. Somebody who's asking us to reverse the situation. So how do you deal with the reverse where you have a team member who is actually the one who is being toxic and has a negative impact to the whole team? So how do you deal with that situation?
The one thing you shouldn't do is have an intervention. I know people like to have, it's something that we've seen a lot. Sorry, I'm going to ask that we go on mute. Thank you. I was losing my train of thought. Sorry. Oh, not so much. Okay. Cool. I'll try and think through the noise of the news. So one of the things that I did, sorry, Michael, I've completely.
So the question was, the reverse situation where you have a team member who's toxic and they have a negative impact to the team. That was the question.
So I've had and I think everyone has been in this situation. And unfortunately, like what Michael said, when the line leader is not a leader, they're not able to manage this situation. And what happens is, when you have one rotten to potato, the whole bag gets rotten. That's one of the risks that you see yourself having. So the one thing you shouldn't do is have an intervention where you all gang up on this one person and give them feedback. The thing that you should do is enable your line leader to have that conversation with the person. So it's you going to tell the line leader things that you have seen, and asking for them to support you in managing this colleague of yours. The problem with you doing it, especially if you don't have a relationship as such, or if you have a relationship, first of all, how you do it could break that relationship. Number two, if you don't have a relationship, the first question they'll ask you is, you're telling me this as who, or what gives you the authority to have this conversation with me? remember, toxic people are very combative and they're very aggressive. So enable your line leader to be able to have this conversation. And how you enable them is going to tell them facts like, Michael does this, which has this impact to the team. I would like your support in handling this situation. Yeah. And it's having it in a respectful way. So you're not necessarily reporting this person in a way that will now you want them to get fired. It's not malicious, it's very developmental. You can even, and I've done it myself, even for people who are senior to me, where I'm having a conversation and telling someone else with authority over them that these are some of the interventions I see that we can have to support them in their development. So it stops being malicious and it becomes more helpful. So that's one of the things that you can do in that situation.
Thanks for that. I think we are on the last question, but I might be missing something. I'll still go through the chat. So the question I can see here is, how can you handle a situation if you've already overshared? I think going back to the point about being relational, so you might find yourself in a situation where you've shared too much and you're already in too deep into the toxic. So how do you handle that situation?
Get out of the mud. Which just means stop sharing. Where you are, stop sharing, and avoid conversations where you're sharing too much about yourself. So, and it just has to do with open conversations where you can even have a conversation with someone and you're telling them that this is what I've noticed has been happening, and I want for us to change this working environment or working situation for us to move in a more professional manner. What I'm committing to is to treat you as a colleague with respect, and I hope that you can commit this to do the same to me. So you can have that official conversation, but the first thing you should do is stop questioning or stop sharing information that you shouldn't share with this person who you've already crossed the boundaries with. But I want to make this disclaimer that sometimes you don't have to, you shouldn't, don't confuse not sharing with not being relational. I see a lot of leaders making these mistakes. They now become cold and they stop being people, they just become a leader. You're capable of being relational without crossing boundaries and oversharing. Yeah.
Cool. I'm just checking if there's any questions I've missed. Looks like there is none from my side.
I
So
hope I was that clear today.
looks like it was a very interesting topic, and I think the eight was it 10 points that you did lay. Of course, that fixed most of the questions that people had. So thanks a lot for that. I don't know if you have any last words before we close off today's session.
No questions from my end. The last words I'd have is being toxic situations are going to happen, and unfortunately it's not only in the workplace, it's going to happen everywhere. It's going to happen to even your kids can be toxic, or most of the times you can be toxic. Remember to recognize it, not stay in the drama. Like the three things you should try to do: recognize it, don't get caught in the drama, and be brave, be courageous, address it like it needs to be addressed. It's like a bear. Yep.
Cool. So thank you for that. I can see a few people leaving you good comments, saying thank you. This was a great session. Modon is also saying this was a very interesting conversation. So thanks very much, Anneliese. We really enjoyed having you again in today's session. And thank you very much for sparing your time. For everyone else, please have yourself a very good evening. And Anneliese, too, have yourself a very good evening. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed the session. Bye.